Dipti is the Climate Justice and Energy Coordinator for Friends of the Earth International. Dipti, thanks very much for joining us, and please address the conference.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I will just share my screen, share a few slides. I hope everyone can see that. Thank you for having me here. And I want to start by saying I'm really humbled to be among so many friends and to be on this great panel. There are so many people that I recognize in the participants list, and I have learned so much from you, and I'm really excited about our collective work forward. So thank you for this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I want to pick up by what Roz talked about, that Sharon just reiterated about the convergence of crisis. This is my first slide, and this was made before I knew what they were talking about. But this is the absolute heart of the problem. We are dealing with multiple interrelated crises, and that should not say Africa, that should say the entire planet. I'm here sitting in the land of Africa, but this is about the entire planet facing multiple interrelated crises. So this is about, of course, the climate crisis, and we've heard about that already. And the World Meteorological Organization has released a report 2 days ago talking about 2 million people's lives that have been destroyed by the ravages of climate change already. And of course, we know this is only going to get worse. And we know that the climate crisis is very inherently unjust because it affects most the people who have done the least to create it. And this is why we call for climate justice, and we need to fight back against the climate crisis. But we're also facing an energy crisis. We have 800 million people on this planet, 600 million of whom are here in this continent who do not have access to electricity. In Mozambique, where I am right now, 70% of our people do not have access to electricity. Of course, we're facing also the pandemic and multiple health crises, and we've seen how our health infrastructure could not withstand this pandemic. We're also facing an inequality crisis, which Sharon also talked about, and we have data from last year which shows the richest 5% of people on this planet have contributed 37% of emissions in that period from 1990 to 2015. So addressing inequality is absolutely a critical part of dealing with the climate crisis. And of course, Sharon already talked about the unemployment and livelihoods crisis, and we see it on the streets. When you walk on the streets of Maputo, you see people are really struggling to survive. People are struggling to lead a life of dignity, and this absolutely should not be in a planet that has so much wealth. So it goes back to the crisis of inequality that we need to address. But of course, this is also about a biodiversity crisis and political crisis. The leaders who are the way that democracy is working in so many different places, they're not representing us, and we need to take back our states. We need to take back our democracies, and that's part of addressing all these different crises. So I'll focus on the energy crisis. So we produced, as Friends of the Earth International, this People Power Now energy manifesto a couple of years ago. And we have certain demands. We have a certain vision of what this future energy systems should look like. This energy system that we want to build, and it should have certain principles and not just be changing the energy source, but leaving everything else in place. And Sharon talked about things like ownership, materials, land. These are all really important for us as Friends of the Earth International. The other concept that we need to ground ourselves in is equity and historical responsibility and fair shares. So as I said in the very beginning, it's very clear who created the crisis and who is suffering the most from it. And it's only just and fair that those who created the crisis be the first to deal with it, be the first to address the crisis. And that's what we mean when we call for equity and fair shares. And this work has been mapped out already. What is each country's fair share? And we feel like this is a very important principle that we need to ground our thinking in. So just yesterday, we have released this Africa Just Recovery Renewable Energy Plan for Africa. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit because it contextualizes a lot of these principles that I talked about. So this is the report that we released yesterday in 3 languages, 3 of the many languages of this continent. So what does that report say? the data and the modeling shows that 100% renewable energy independent Africa is technically and financially feasible. What it means is that we need to change our development pathway. We need to end fossil fuels, not just on this continent, but throughout the world. And then what are the principles of the energy system that we want to see? And some of this was mentioned already by the amazing speakers who came before me. It needs to be a socially owned, democratic, renewable energy system that serves people, that protects biodiversity, that strengthens land rights, as Lang mentioned in the beginning, that promotes gender justice, and that doesn't lead to increased extractivism. This is not about, okay, the global north wants to change its energy development pathway, so you need a whole bunch of renewable energy and you need the rare earth minerals. Okay, let's get them from the Congo, or let's get them from Argentina. No, this needs to be about, as a globe, together, all of us, how are we moving towards a transformation that uplifts everyone? This is what we really need to be talking about. And the transformation must be accompanied by really key principles like energy sufficiency, enough for everyone, but no excess. Energy sovereignty, energy as a common good and not as a commodity. So these are some of the principles where we are coming from. So this particular document that we released yesterday had modeling from a renowned academic, Sven Teska from Australia. Many of you will know his work already. And this is just about the African context, but this work is actually done for the entire globe. His work covers much more than Africa. But in the context of Africa, we're talking about the fact that in 2016, Africa used 168 gigawatts of energy. And what we're talking, and as I said earlier, 600 million people on this continent do not have access to electricity. So we're talking about a goal of 300 gigawatts renewable energy by 2030 and 2,000 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2050. And now comes to the point about the job growth numbers, because it's extremely important, and I'm very aware of who I'm talking to right now. And the work that the union movement has done, as Ross says in the very beginning, the concept of the just transition and what Sharon said about the Red-Green Alliance is so critical, because the unemployment and livelihood crises are one of the multiple crises that we're facing. So we definitely need to address that, in addition to dealing with the energy crisis and the inequality crisis and the climate crisis. So the modeling that our report is based on shows that the renewable energy potential on this continent is huge, and it has the potential to create 7 million jobs on this continent. So I'm giving you an example of some of the work that we're doing at the Africa level, but the same data does exist. The point that it's feasibly and technically possible in the entire planet, and we need to work together to push for that. And gender justice is really important here, because patriarchy is also one of the crises, which I had not listed in my slide, but it's also one of the crises that we need to fight at the same time. So the workforce in renewable energy has more women than oil and gas. And that's another reason for us to push for a renewable energy revolution. I won't go into too much of the details on this, because this is about where does the money come from to actually do this. And for us, from the Global South perspective, we need to think about stopping tax avoidance, stopping tax evasion, stopping illicit financial flows, which is what robs the people of this continent and other places in the Global South of their money. So I won't go into detail on that. But the second point is really important in this context when we talk about a North-South relationships. The rich countries owe a climate and ecological debt to the Global South. And if that is repaid, then already we in the South have ways to be able to do this renewable energy transformation for ourselves. We also need to think about canceling the debt. And this is another interesting idea, a global pandemic solidarity tax on the wealthiest. This is something that could deal with inequality and also give the resources that we need as a planet and as the Global South in particular to be able to have this, the transformation that we need to see. So in 2017, we had a really beautiful interaction the International Trade Union Confederation and Friends of the Earth International held some joint events at the COP, at the Climate Convention in Bonn. And some of you who are on the call today, of course, were with us, Joshua from the Philippines, Matthew, we were all together. And for me, it marks a moment that we need to think about that red-green alliance that Sharon was talking about, that we need to look at the interrelated crises and realize that we need to be able to fight the unemployment and climate crisis and all the others. We need to be working together. So for us in FoE, a just transition must be rooted in system change and mean a change in power relations. I won't go into all of the details on this slide, it's too many words, but we need to fight for a world that is socially and economically just. And an unjust transition is not acceptable, one that leaves workers behind, abandons communities to post-industrial decline, deepens inequality, etc. So this is something that we are very clear on. Part of the transformation really is about how we come together and how we support the union movement. And there I have a quote from the ITUC itself. And maybe just to add, in a moment, we need to talk about a change in value systems, because we need to talk about the value of solidarity, the value of cooperation, the value of human interconnectedness. We have a term here in Southern Africa, which is Ubuntu, which is the human interconnectedness. I am because we are. And this is really important when we're envisioning this world of the future. It isn't just about changing the energy source. It's about targeting all these interrelated crises and having a change of value so that we're actually building a world that supports life and isn't about profit. And I just wanted to say one quick thing, because we have heard already about net zero. And for us, as Friends of the Earth International, we're really wary about this term net zero, because net zero is not zero. It's about, it's a smokescreen that allows polluters to keep polluting as long as somewhere they're sucking that carbon out of the air. And this is extremely dangerous because it allows the pollution to continue. And also they come to our communities in the global south for lands and forests to sequester their carbon. And this is extremely problematic. So this is something that we've been working on. These are two reports that we recently launched. And of course, I know the unicorn is the national animal of Scotland. So Friends of the Earth Scotland, we talked to them before finalizing this title and this image. But these are two reports we've released this year, which show how net zero is extremely problematic. So I wanted to bring that in as well, because this is about North-South cooperation. We need to have that North-South cooperation, which means that northern pollution cannot be sent to be sucked up in the South. It's just not okay. That's it. I will end there. I'm sorry I went over a little bit. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. I'll stop here.